Most people think pressure means something has gone wrong. They assume that if life is heavy, if things feel tight, delayed, or overwhelming, it must be a sign of failure. But that belief alone is what keeps them stuck. Pressure is not punishment. Pressure is preparation. Life doesn't turn up the heat to break you. It turns up the heat to reveal what's already inside you. Think about it. Nothing valuable is formed without pressure. Diamonds don't appear in comfort. Strength doesn't grow in ease. Expansion doesn't happen in safety. The very tension you're feeling right now is evidence that you are being stretched beyond who you used to be. When pressure enters your life, it's usually because your current mindset, habits, or identity can no longer support where you're going. So life applies resistance, not to stop you, but to upgrade you. And here's the truth most people miss. The discomfort you feel is not a signal to quit. It's a signal that growth is happening. Pressure exposes weak patterns, emotional triggers, and limiting beliefs so they can no longer hide. And once they're exposed, they can finally be transformed. But preparation only works if you don't fight it blindly. If you interpret pressure as rejection, you shrink. If you interpret it as training, you rise. The moment you stop saying, why is this happening to me, and start saying, what is this developing in me, everything changes. Pressure sharpens focus. Pressure builds resilience. Pressure forces you to become more disciplined, more aware, more intentional. It strips away excuses and demands presence. Look closely at your life and you'll notice a pattern. The seasons that felt the hardest were the ones that changed you the most. The moments you thought would break you were actually teaching you how to stand stronger. Pressure taught you boundaries. Pressure taught you courage. Pressure taught you what you will no longer tolerate. That's not punishment. That's refinement. And here's the powerful part. Pressure doesn't last forever, but the strength it builds does. When you stop resisting the heat, it stops burning you and starts shaping you. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. What once felt confusing becomes clear, and suddenly you realize you are not behind. You are being prepared for a level of responsibility, influence, and impact you couldn't have handled before. So if you're in a season where everything feels intense, tight, or demanding, don't rush to escape it. Don't numb it. Don't label it as failure. Pause, breathe, pay attention. Because life is training you for something more. And when the pressure has done its work, you won't just survive the heat, you'll turn it into light. Pain has a way of making us defensive. The moment it shows up, we tense up, we distract ourselves, we numb it, or we pretend it isn't there. We tell ourselves we're fine while our bodies carry the weight and our minds quietly unravel. But pain doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. In fact, the more you resist it, the louder it becomes. Pain isn't your enemy. Avoidance is. The truth is, pain becomes power the moment you stop running from it and start listening to it. Every uncomfortable emotion is carrying information. Anxiety is trying to protect you. Anger is pointing to a boundary that's been crossed. Sadness is asking you to slow down and process what you've lost. When you shut these emotions down, you don't become stronger. You become disconnected. But when you allow yourself to feel without judgment, pain begins to shift. It turns into awareness, and awareness is the doorway to change. Most people want healing without honesty. They want peace without confrontation. They want growth without discomfort. But transformation demands presence. You can't heal what you refuse to feel. The moment you sit with your pain instead of fighting it, you start to understand it. And once you understand it, it no longer controls you. Pain only has power over you when it remains unconscious. Think about the times you grew the most. It wasn't during ease or applause. It was in the moments you were cracked open, disappointed, rejected, exhausted, unsure. Pain forced you to look inward. It exposed patterns you had been repeating on autopilot. It showed you where you were overgiving, self-abandoning, or shrinking to survive. That exposure was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. Pain didn't show up to harm you, it showed up to wake you up. When you stop resisting pain, something remarkable happens. Your nervous system begins to settle. Your mind becomes clearer. Instead of reacting, you start responding. Instead of exploding or collapsing, you become intentional. This is where pain turns into strength, not because it disappears, but because it no longer owns you. You carry it with awareness instead of fear. And this is how heat becomes light. Pain refines perception. It sharpens intuition. It teaches you discernment. You begin to recognize what aligns with you and what drains you. You stop forcing yourself into spaces that require you to betray yourself. You choose differently, not from bitterness, but from wisdom. So don't rush to silence your pain. Don't shame yourself for feeling deeply. Let pain finish its message. Let it teach you what it came to teach you. Because when pain is faced with courage instead of resistance, it doesn't break you. It builds you into someone who can stand in the heat and still shine. Life doesn't hand us meaning, we assign it. Two people can walk through the same fire and come out completely different. Not because the heat was different, but because the mind interpreting it was. This is where most people lose their power. They believe their emotions are caused by circumstances, when in reality, emotions are shaped by perception. The situation is the spark, but the mind decides whether that spark becomes a wildfire or a light source. Your brain is constantly asking one question: is this safe or is this a threat? When pressure shows up, the untrained mind sounds the alarm, floods the body with fear, and pushes you into reaction mode. Suddenly, everything feels urgent, personal, and overwhelming. But when the mind is disciplined, pressure is processed differently. Instead of panic, there is curiosity. Instead of collapse, there is focus. The heat doesn't disappear, but it becomes usable. This is why mastery of thought is mastery of life. The stories you tell yourself in hard moments matter more than the moments themselves. If you tell yourself, I can't handle this, your body tightens and your energy drops. If you tell yourself, this is challenging, but I am capable, your posture changes, your breath deepens, and your mind stays open. Nothing external has changed, yet everything internal has. When you train your mind to pause before reacting, you reclaim control. You stop feeding fear with imagination. You stop turning temporary discomfort into permanent identity. You stop personalizing pressure and start interpreting it. And interpretation is everything. Because interpretation determines whether pressure weakens you or sharpens you. Think about a flame. Uncontained, it destroys. Directed, it illuminates. Your thoughts are the same way. Undirected thinking burns energy through worry, overthinking, and self-doubt. Directed thinking turns pressure into purpose, focus, and momentum. This is not about positive thinking. It's about accurate thinking. It's about telling the truth without adding fear to it. When life applies heat, the mind must become still enough to choose its response. Stillness doesn't mean inaction. It means awareness. It means breathing before speaking, observing before deciding, grounding before moving. In that space, wisdom rises, the chaos quiets, and what once felt like too much becomes manageable. The more you practice this, the less reactive you become. You stop living at the mercy of moods and moments. You stop leaking energy to things you cannot control. You begin to respond from alignment instead of anxiety. And that is where confidence is built, not in the absence of heat, but in the presence of it. So remember this, the fire is not your enemy. Your untrained mind is. Train the mind, and the heat that once threatened to consume you will become the very light that guides your way. We all say we want growth, but what we usually mean is comfort with progress. We want expansion that doesn't interrupt our routines, challenge our identity, or expose our fear. But real growth hasn't worked that way. Growth lives in the uncomfortable zone, the place where you don't feel fully prepared, fully confident, or fully in control. And that discomfort is not a sign you're failing, it's a sign you're stretching beyond what you've known. Every level of your life has required a different version of you. The person you were 5 years ago could not sustain what you're carrying now, and the person you are today cannot remain unchanged if you want to move forward. Discomfort appears when your old patterns are no longer enough. It shows up when your familiar coping mechanisms stop working. And instead of seeing that as a threat, you have to recognize it as an invitation. The uncomfortable zone is where excuses lose their power. You can no longer rely on what once worked. You can no longer hide behind habit or familiarity. You're forced to become intentional. You start asking better questions. You listen more closely to yourself. You become aware of where you've been playing small, waiting for permission, or settling for survival instead of alignment. Most people retreat at this stage. They step back into comfort because it feels safe. But safety and growth rarely coexist. Comfort keeps you predictable. Discomfort makes you creative. When things feel unstable, you begin to innovate. When you feel uncertain, you become more present. When you're stretched, you discover strength you didn't know you had. This is why the moments you feel most exposed often precede you. Our greatest breakthroughs. You're learning to trust yourself without guarantees. You're learning to move without clarity. You're learning to stand without applause. And that is how confidence is built. Not from success alone, but from surviving uncertainty with integrity. Discomfort also refines discernment. It teaches you what aligns with you and what drains you. You stop forcing connections that require you to shrink. You stop chasing outcomes that cost you your peace. You start choosing growth that honors your values, not just your ego. And that kind of growth lasts. When you stop running from discomfort, you stop running from yourself. You begin to realize that the fear you felt was not danger, it was expansion. The trembling wasn't weakness, it was activation. The uncertainty wasn't confusion, it was transition. And suddenly, the uncomfortable zone becomes familiar, not easy, but empowering. So if you're standing in a season where everything feels unfamiliar, unstable, or demanding, don't mistake that for regression. You are not falling apart. You are breaking open. And if you stay present, stay intentional, and stay courageous, you'll discover that the very space you feared is the space where you finally become who you were meant to be. When pressure rises, our instinct is to react, to speak quickly, decide fast, fix immediately, or escape the discomfort as soon as possible. Noise feels productive when we're overwhelmed. Movement feels safer than stillness. But the truth is, most of our confusion doesn't come from not knowing what to do. It comes from doing too much without clarity. This is why stillness is not weakness, it is strategy. Stillness is where chaos begins to make sense. In moments of intensity, your nervous system is flooded. Thoughts race, emotions spike, and perspective narrows. If you act from that state, you're not choosing, you're reacting. Stillness interrupts that cycle. A pause, a breath, a moment of silence tells your body that it's safe enough to slow down. And when the body settles, the mind follows. What felt overwhelming starts to feel organized. What felt urgent starts to feel intentional. Stillness doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop panicking. It's the space where you separate what matters from what's just loud. When everything feels heavy, silence becomes a filter. It removes distortion. It allows you to hear the quiet truths you've been avoiding beneath the noise, the ones that don't shout but guide. This is where insight lives. Insight doesn't arrive in chaos, it arrives in calm. In stillness, patterns become visible. You start noticing how certain situations trigger the same reactions. You see where you've been repeating cycles, saying yes when you meant no, holding on when it was time to release. Stillness gives you the awareness to choose differently. And here's the shift most people miss. Stillness doesn't delay progress. It accelerates it. When you move with clarity instead of urgency, you waste less energy. You stop fixing the wrong problems. You stop fighting battles that were never yours. You stop forcing outcomes that require you to betray your own alignment. Action taken from stillness is precise, not frantic. In the heat of life, stillness becomes the bridge between pressure and purpose. It turns emotional reactions into thoughtful responses. It transforms confusion into direction. You don't need to have all the answers. You need to be calm enough to hear the next right one. That's how chaos becomes insight. The more you practice stillness, the more resilient you become. You don't get pulled into every storm. You don't absorb every emotion in the room. You stay rooted while things move around you. And that stability becomes your strength. Not because life gets easier, but because you get clearer. So the next time the pressure feels loud and everything inside you wants to rush, pause instead. Choose stillness. Let the noise pass. Because in that quiet space, you'll find the clarity you've been searching for and the direction you need to turn heat into light. There comes a moment when you realize your struggle was never just about you. The pain you carried, the pressure you survived, the confusion you pushed through, it all begins to make sense when you see how it can serve someone else. Suffering feels isolating when you're inside it, but meaning is born when you step back and recognize that what you endured gave you insight that comfort never could. Your experience becomes valuable the moment you stop hiding it and start honoring what it taught you. When you move through hardship with awareness, you don't just come out stronger, you come out wiser. You learn how to sit with discomfort. You learn how to navigate fear without letting it define you. You learn how to keep going even when certainty is absent. And that wisdom doesn't belong to you alone. It becomes a light, something that can guide, reassure, and steady someone else who's still in the heat. People don't need perfection. They need honesty. They don't need someone who never struggled. They need someone who struggled and learned how to stand again. Your story, when shared with integrity, creates permission. It tells someone else, you're not weak for feeling this. You're not broken for being here. There is a way through. That is how pain transforms into purpose. But this doesn't require a platform or an audience. It starts in small moments, in the way you listen without judgment, the way you speak with compassion, the way you respond with patience because you remember how heavy it once felt. Your resilience becomes reassurance. Your boundaries become guidance. Your growth becomes evidence that transformation is possible. This is how heat becomes light. What once drained you now illuminates. What once wounded you now informs. You don't romanticize the pain, but you respect the wisdom it produced. You stop asking why it happened and start asking, gee, how it can be used. And in that shift, suffering loses its bitterness and gains meaning. There's also a quiet responsibility that comes with growth. When you've walked through the fire and learned how to breathe again, you carry something sacred, not to preach, not to perform, but to show what's possible, to stand steady when others are shaking, to offer perspective when emotions run high, to be proof that the heat doesn't last forever. So don't minimize what you survived. Don't dismiss the lessons you earned. The strength you built wasn't accidental. It was preparation. And when you choose to let your story serve instead of staying silent, your healing extends beyond you. Because the greatest transformation isn't just overcoming the fire, it's becoming the light that helps someone else find their way out. Don't feel fully prepared, fully confident, or fully in control. And that discomfort is not a sign you're failing. It's a sign you're stretching beyond what you've known.